This is the video lecture for microbiology for Thursday, the 9th of April. I hope you got my message regarding the first video lecture. I wanted you to watch that 13-minute video on COVID-19 and get your perspective on that. And also, there will be some questions, and I will be really clear on this when we do our study session, but there will be some questions on COVID-19 from that video on the exam. So the last chapter that we're going to take up in, and I don't know, we might cover some additional information after this, depending on how far I get. But I want to do chapter 19 on infectious diseases affecting the nervous system. I do want to let you know that I have not posted the video lab for lab 25 yet. I'm getting ready to do that today, Thursday, the 9th of April. So you'll have that video lab, and plus that will include critical thinking and clinical applications for lab 23, which originally I had due tomorrow, Friday, the 10th of April, but that's Good Friday, so I'm not going to have homework due that day. That's a day off. And instead, that lab 25 will be due on Monday, the 13th of April. So anyhow, you get a little bit of a delay there. Sorry for the confusion, but you will get critical thinking and clinical applications on the video that I'm going to do for the lab this afternoon. Okay, so looking at the nervous system, we're first going to discuss the nervous system and its different defenses. Then we'll talk about normal biota. This should say of the nervous system. I don't know why it says of the skin. And then we'll talk about nervous system diseases that are caused by microbes. These can be quite serious, and so we want to pay very close attention to them. Okay, and so here's your nervous system. You've got your brain and your spinal cord, which are your central nervous system, and then you have your peripheral nerves, which is your peripheral nervous system. If you look at the brain and spinal cord themselves, then the pia mater is the white portion, the subarachnoid space, which is around the cerebellum, is light purple, and then the arachnoid material, this is an open space for cerebral spinal fluid, is purple, and then the dura, which it surrounds the system, is in tan, and the dura goes all the way down, as well as the arachnoid space goes all the way down the spinal cord to close to your tailbone. The dural space is in dark blue, and that dark blue space has blood circulation through it. Okay, so the membranes around the nervous system are meninges. When you hear about meninges, then you might think of meningitis, which is the swelling and inflammation of the meninges. This includes the dura mater, arachnoid mater, and the pia mater. Okay, between the pia mater and the arachnoid mater is the subarachnoid space. And this space is filled with cerebral spinal fluid. Okay, cerebral spinal fluid is when you get like a spinal tap for measuring different proteins in the cerebral spinal fluid. That's the fluid that gets tapped. Okay, it's clear. It's serum-like. It provides cushion. Okay, you have a cerebral spinal fluid pulse that goes through your brain, and it provides nutrients also to the central nervous system. Okay, and this can be a common site of infection, especially if there's some type of wounding of the subarachnoid space and the dura that would cause leakage of microbes that don't belong there. Okay, in terms of your peripheral nervous systems, then we have nerves and ganglia. And the ganglion is a swelling in the nerve where all the cell bodies in the neurons congregate. Okay, and the defenses are mainly structural. These are mainly barriers for the peripheral nervous system, PNS, and the central nervous system. You mainly have structures that keep these things from being infected. And the blood-brain barrier, which is very, very important. You don't want the blood-brain barrier. This is a membrane barrier. You don't want it to become solubilized. This prevents most microorganisms from passing into the central nervous system. An eclipsed blood-brain barrier, though, leaves you susceptible to disease. Okay, so the central nervous system, it only mounts a partial immunological response when challenged. Okay, there is a lymphatic system. Your book was actually produced before they knew there was a lymphatic system in the brain, but compared to the rest of the body, we would call it immunologically privileged because it only has partial defenses. Okay. An immunological response that's too strong that could lead to scarring could cause damage to the central nervous system. And you get what are called glial scars when your brain is fighting off an infection, and that could lead to loss of neuronal tissue. Brain cells do have MHC markers to identify themselves as self, but they have fewer markers and less complement protein. Okay, and then you have cells that are called microglia. These microglial cells are phagocytic, so they will attach and attack foreign invaders. And there are also macrophages because you do have a bloodstream and a blood system going through the central nervous system, but the macrophages are much less active. Okay, in terms of a normal biota, this is a sterile system. You shouldn't have any type of floating microbes in your cerebral spinal fluid, your central nervous system, or your peripheral nervous system. You can have viruses that will congregate in the nerve ganglion. They like herpes simplex virus and varicella. Varicella can then cause things like shingles. Herpes will flare up as well. But this does not represent a normal state. There are also gut microbiota, and they may influence neurological disease. There's a gut-brain axis, so there are a lot of neurological diseases that are tied to the gut microbiome. Okay, and so then we start with diseases. If we look, we've got meningitis. Okay, this is an inflammation of the meninges. And usually it's caused by some type of microorganism. Bacterial can be viral as well. Okay, the most serious form, however, is caused by bacteria because the progression of the infection can be quite severe. There could also be co-infection or previous infection with respiratory viruses. And usually what you do is a lumbar puncture. Okay, so you go to your lumbar region of your back. They take a spinal tap then, and then they take some of the cerebral spinal fluid. They do a gram stain of it, and then they look at the culture. Okay, in terms of symptoms, photophobia, so sensitivity to light, headache, stiff neck, fever, and a lot of white blood cells then are influxed into the cerebral spinal fluid. So if you have these characteristic symptoms, these are quite distinct, especially the stiff neck, and it's accompanied by fever and malaise and headache. Then if you have that stiff neck accompanying these other sort of flu-like symptoms, except for photophobia, then you should go to emergency right away because you could have a potential meningitis and it needs to be treated right away. It can be acute or chronic. And it is, you're looking at students, college students that can get this type of meningitis. because college students are a little more run down, they're burning the candle at both ends, so it's more difficult for microbes to infect the healthy nervous system. One of the bacteria that causes meningitis is Neisseria meningitidis. Okay, it's about 25% of all the meningitis cases. It's a gram-negative diplococcus. And this is most frequently involved in young children. Okay. And the serotypes that are most common are A, B, C, Y, and W153. There's lots of different serotypes. There are vaccines available. A meningococcal vaccine is available for the serotypes that are listed here. Okay. And here's a diplococcus of Neisseria meningitidis. You can see that it's got fimbriae these are not conjugation pili. They're fimbriae that are emanating from the cells themselves. Okay. And usually your initial infection site is somewhere in your mouth, okay, or your nasal cavity, and then that will spread through your nasal cavity into your meninges, and this will create meningitis. In terms of pathogenesis, it can go through the upper respiratory tract, nose and mouth, through blood vessels, and then penetrate the meninges, so it doesn't require some type of wounding. It releases an endotoxin, okay, that is a potent white blood cell stimulator. And then this will cause cytokines to be released by white blood cells, and they will cause a vascular collapse just because the cytokines will create a system where your vascular system then just dilates completely. And then you also get characteristic marks, sort of spidery marks on your skin called petechiae. Okay, and these can become serious with high fever, chills, delirium, ecchymosis, shock, and death. Okay, and here are petechiae. These sort of spidery marks are petechiae. This down here, this necrosis, dying of the skin, is ecchymosis. Okay. In terms of transmission, somebody that's a carrier of Neisseria meningitidis then can transmit this through droplets and secretion. About 10% of the population can exist as carriers, so they're just normally carrying this in their microbiota. And where the disease is endemic or in hospital settings, then this rate can exceed 50%. Okay. A lot of young adults carry this, and you see meningitis correlating with the dry season in sub-Saharan Africa. This is believed that it is just easier to then infect dry, cracked mucous membranes. Okay. Menactra protects a bit against these serotypes except for B. And 15% of all meningococcal meningitis is fatal. So it's very, very important that you catch something like this very early on. So if you get that characteristic stiff neck and high fever, then you need to begin treatment. Okay, antibiotics would be ceftriaxone, chloramphenicol, azathioprine, NAM, And then if you're in close contact with a meningococcal meningitis patient, then you should be taking an antibiotic as well. Another causative agent for meningitis is Streptococcus pneumoniae. This causes pneumococcal meningitis. This is in compromised patients like alcoholics, patients who are missing their spleen, or those with sickle cell disease. And there's a lot more carriers of Streptococcus pneumoniae. The carriage rate is about 30%, so it's considered normal microbiota for your respiratory tract, but it does have the potential to become pathogenic. Okay, it can penetrate your mucous membranes in your respiratory tree, can enter the bloodstream and then the meninges. And Streptococcus does have strains that are capsular, and capsular bacteria are pathogenic. They are more easily evade white blood cells. Okay, produces alpha hemolysin and peroxide, which both damage tissue. Alpha hemolysin damages red blood cells, so it's alpha hemolytic. And what you'll see is that when it's grown on blood agar, it will completely obliterate the blood cells. Resistant to penicillins, cephalosporins, and macrolides. So something that is used very often is vancomycin, although it has a lot of toxic side effects. And ceftriaxone is used unless the particular strain is determined to be sensitive to penicillin D. Okay, there's Prevnar 13, and that's on the infant child vaccination schedule. So that's actually required for school attendance in California. And then Prevnar 23, which replaced Pneumovax, is available for adults. Other agents, Haemophilus influenzae, Listeria monocytogenes, Cryptococcus neoformans is actually a fungal form of meningitis. Coccidioides immitis is fungal, and then certain viruses can cause meningitis. This is a, oh gosh, let's see. Oh, that's not streptococcal pneumoniae. This is a fungal form. No, wait, let me go back. Okay. That's Haemophilus influenzae. This is a form of fungus that can cause meningitis. And this is another form of fungus that forms arthrospores as well as spherules. Okay, and here's our kind of wrap up of meningitis. It can be Neisseria meningitidis, Streptococcus pneumoniae, or Haemophilus influenzae. All of it is cultured, usually gram-stained. Haemophilus influenzae is cultured on chocolate agar, which is just burnt blood agar. Each one does have a vaccination, and then treatment are through antibiotics. And Neisseria meningitidis, you always see petechiae and ecchymosis. Staphylococcus pneumoniae you see in adults. And Haemophilus influenzae is actually taken a downturn. Other forms include Listeria monocytogenes, Cryptococcus neoformans, Coccidioides immitis, and viruses. Okay, and that was really quick. That is this isn't the end of the chapter. I still have more slides to prepare for this chapter, which I will post on Moodle. But this is the end of this particular video lecture for Thursday.